Hey everyone, welcome to this week's CISO Talk. I'm your host, James Azar. Thanks so much for tuning into today's podcast. I have a very, very awesome show coming up. Superman's dad's going to be joining us on today's episode. So we're going to talk about, how did we get Superman? Jorel Van Os will be joining me here in just a few moments. But before we get started on this week's episode, a few quick housekeeping notes. Make sure to, one, subscribe. If you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe, turn on the notification bell. If you're listening on your favorite podcast listening platform, please subscribe to the show and give us a 5-star rating that helps boost us up in the ratings and gets in the rankings and ratings and helps get more people exposed to our content. So I'm very grateful if you could do that. If you haven't signed up yet, we have more podcasts on your favorite podcast listening platform, including the CyberHub podcast, where I do a practitioner brief every single day, Monday through Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that's also live on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn just by following us at the CyberHub podcast page on either LinkedIn or Facebook or on YouTube. So you want to make sure to get that done. We have an awesome episode today. You don't want to miss it. You really, really don't want to miss it, because in about 2 seconds, we're going to kick off CISO Talk. Here we go, guys. You ready? Let's bring it on.
From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're listening to the CISO Talk podcast. No sales, no bullshit, just straight talk. Straight talk. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Jorel Van Os, the CISO over at Acrisure. Welcome to this week's CISO Talk.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. First of all, what's it like to be Superman's dad?
Well, I think this says more about you than it does about me. Only a certain kind of nerd knows the whole Jorel thing.
I will be a nerd for the rest of my life.
That's fair.
I will be a nerd for the rest of my life, and I'm proud of my nerdiness.
As you should be, absolutely.
Right.
But it is funny, the specific, groups that that recognize my name as being Superman's dad's name. But I have my dad to blame for that. So
was your dad like a big Superman fan?
He's a big fan of weird names, I think is what it comes down to.
Very, very, very.
My siblings and I all have unique names.
That is a very interesting fact. I wonder how many people are going to now just like write you random things like, "Hey, Superman's dad." In the Middle East, in Arab culture and Islamic culture, it is customary to call a man, once he's married and has a son, you don't refer to him by his first name anymore. Mm-hmm. You refer to him as Abu, meaning father of, and the name. So we can refer to you as Abu Clark Kent.
Or Kala.
Or Kala. Yeah, I mean, just depends if we want to stay authentic.
True.
Right? It's very cool. So thank you for coming on the show. I'm very happy to have you on the show because you are one of the young CISO voices among the very few that still that are here in the community. Naomi Buckwalter being another one, and a few more. And so I'm very excited to I'm excited to have you on the show, and I want you to share with our audience a little bit about how you got started in cyber and your journey to becoming a CISO at a very young age.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it really starts before formal employment, for that matter. Getting interested in website design, and not so much design off of that, but website hosting and server administration as a teenager for friends and bands, and then kind of scaling that out to a website hosting service and then from running that, you get used to WordPress sites getting hacked because people don't update their stuff. And so that kind of really started me on this journey of cybersecurity. And then, I got into telecommunications and cloud services, professional services provider, and excelled at that. And that's where I made the formal transition into cybersecurity. And then came over to Acrisure for our program here.
That's so. How long have you been at Acrisure, and how long have you been in your current role?
A year and a half at Acrisure, and I've been CISO for a year.
So your first year on the job. So I want to talk about that just a little bit because I think it's very interesting. Where people always talk about like the first 90 days, the first 100 days. And I think those are, predominantly, I like to call it, that's the buzzword of starting something, right? Like, presidents and politicians do that in my first 100 days. And you're like, yeah, what do you really know in the first 100 days?
And that's what it is, right? It's learning, it's listening. It's not making decisions right away. It's understanding the business and their needs.
Right. So that's why the first year is more interesting. Kind of speaking to someone who's been a year in the role. So let's play a little game here. All right. Because I want to get into I want to get into kind of like leadership in just a moment, but I want to play a little game. So you got hired. You're the CISO. What did you think your first year was going to look like?
I didn't have a ton of specific expectations as was about what it would look like. Is more that I was just excited to be part of the team, and that Acrisure is a place where people are excited to work, and that I shared in that excitement, and that has definitely come true. But I didn't have a lot of expectations as to what that would be like, which is good because Acrisure is a really dynamic environment. We're always changing. We're a really young company, especially compared to some of our peers that are well over 100 years old. We're relatively young, so I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, we're losing a little bit of your audio here and there, Jorel. Like your voice is going up or down just slightly, like the volume. If you don't mind just slightly adjusting that. So you're a year later into the role, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell your 1 year old? What would you tell yourself a year ago that you've learned over this last year?
I think that what I really admire about our leadership is the long-term strategic thinking, and then their value in people, and that means a lot to me. And so to really have known about that investment ahead of time would have helped me have that much more confidence moving forward, because we really do have so much support from senior leadership, and that goes a really long way. And the other thing is, and we find this out especially with COVID-19, is how caring they actually are. So I would say that would be what I would have wanted to do.
Brilliant. So let's talk a little bit about leadership. So you've been in your CISO role for about a year, and you're a fairly young chief information security officer compared to, like, if we look at the curve in age, you're right there among us, the youngsters. I think we're the kinds that still go out until 1 a.m. I'd like to say that some of our peers just call it a night at 9.
Well, we're CISOs. We don't go to sleep.
Or we don't go to sleep. That is also very true. And we don't go to sleep, and we still look halfway decent. We don't look tired as much. Let's talk a little bit about hiring and breaking into cybersecurity. What are some of the skills and qualities you look for when you're looking to onboard people into your team? What are some of the key skills you're really interested in and looking for?
That's a great question. And we're actually, I recently went to a virtual job fair last week, and so it's really fun to participate with students. And we've been interviewing for interns lately. So just to, and also a senior IM architecture role. But with both of those, it was really interesting to just see what the candidates were like, and then understand, what their perspectives were. But for me, passion is probably, passion and integrity are number one, because you're not going to know everything from the first day. Otherwise, you're going to get bored. Not that no one's bored at Acrisure, but I don't hire for what you have done. I hire for what you can do. So being passionate about cybersecurity is really important, especially to set yourself apart from all the other folks out there. Like, show me your project, show me what you're into. Like, if you're into compliance, I want to know about that, because that's cool. If you're geeking out about GRC, that's unique, and you need to let that part shine. So find any way in an interview or in a resume or any other way you possibly can to show that you have a home lab, that you like messing around with VMs, Kali Linux, whatever it happens to be. I think that's really essential, because as long as you're motivated to work hard and learn continue to learn it, and that's what's going to inspire you to be the best person that you can be in the job. And that's whether you're senior or the most junior person there is. It doesn't matter. We all need to be like that.
Yeah, I completely agree with the fact that passion is something really, really important, and geeking out. I think we were nerding out here a minute ago, but when you look at the idea of, or the concept of really people, coming into this industry, and some of the challenges that exist in terms of, I don't want to say the entry level roles, but the more transitional roles. What is there any best practice you use to really kind of identify the hidden talent? Because I feel like CVs are just so, I feel like we've updated so much of our life with technology, and then we've kept one process that hasn't changed at all. And that's how we hire people.
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the things that I did, I think that was fairly unique in my last role, is I created something for people breaking into cybersecurity. I created a system of 3 or 4 scenarios, almost like D&D, if you want to get nerdy again, where I kind of was, again, we're going with that analogy, the dungeon master, and I gave them a real ticket or a real email or a real vulnerability where you didn't have to be extremely technical or have done this job a lot, and ask them to look at it and tell me what they would have done. And you can do anything you want. You can call the cops. You can escalate to your supervisor. What are you going to do when you see this vulnerability? And it was based on real things that I had done and seen as an analyst. So some of the key moments in my entire career, some days we go to work and that one day is pays for your whole salary in the year, right? So those kinds of moments are the ones that I try to capture and just see if they had that attention to detail that we needed, and that they would actually dig in, because something might be just what a normal support ticket, but it might be actually crucial to the business's security. And so someone who has the judgment skills to make that determination, not necessarily technical skills, but the judgment skills to do that is really, really key. And I think we've identified some really unique candidates that way, and we were able to make some excellent hiring decisions. So I would say that that's a good way to do hiring, especially new folks transitioning in.
Yeah, I like that. That's really cool. I really love that. That's I'm glad I asked you that question. I may steal some of that, or borrow it, or use it myself. So let's talk a little bit about our skills as CISOs, right? Because we talk a lot about what we look for in people, but one of the things I've noticed is a lot of the people that are in cybersecurity, because of the rapid growth and of cyber, are always looking for good leaders. So what are key qualities that you think we need to have as CISOs in order to really succeed and have longevity in our roles?
Yeah, so I would say the first is caring about your team and hiring the right people and keeping them happy. I mean, I'm nothing without my team. They're completely crucial to what we do, and I love them, to be honest. And I'm really lucky that I have the team that I do. I would say that's critical. Another piece would be being able to tell the story to anybody in the company or outside the company. What's the story of cybersecurity? A lot of people say it's a business, and it is. But what's your story? What's your journey? What are you going to tell? I think that's really important and key, and something that I've learned a lot about in the last year and a half is how to do that, how to relate that to various stakeholders. And the last one I would say is strategy. Strategy is really critical to what anybody does, but just figuring out what is your roadmap really look like? What are you really trying to accomplish? And then executing on that. And then also at the same time being adaptable, because things are going to change very rapidly, and having that flexibility is crucial too.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So in your first year, you kind of mentioned something a little bit ago on the show, and you talked about if you could tell yourself something a year ago, you'd say, your senior leadership is there to support you and look at that. So how, more or less, that's what you said. You said you kind of attributed something to senior leadership. So what have you done to really stand out as an enterprise leader as a CISO?
Yeah, that's it's difficult to talk about myself like that, I think, in some ways, but I think the team is really one really big piece of that, because if I hadn't hired the right people, if you couldn't tell that they had just the same amount of passion and that much more technical knowledge than me, I think that really sets me apart in what I've done. I would also say I'm willing to get my hands on the keyboard, not because it's like 100% necessary or that we need to. It's more that I really want to understand, and have my team know and acknowledge that I'm willing to go get my hands dirty and do the same things as them, even if it's some of the harder work or the work that we don't always want to do, because it will help me understand from their perspective too. Because how do I know if I'm on the right path and guiding them properly if I don't even know what it looks like to do their job effectively? So I like to get hands on keyboard some of the time and get real involvement in some of the projects. That way, have that understanding. I'd also say, because our key stakeholders are our agency partners, so talking to them. So I'll randomly pick up certain trouble tickets and just call them and just try to understand the need. Because sometimes if you ask the 5 whys, you'll understand that they didn't ask for administrative rights on their computer. It turns out they didn't need that. They asked for it, but it's because if you ask why and why and why and why back far enough, you realize that what they're actually the problem they're trying to solve, and you realize how cybersecurity can help solve it, and be more of I know it's a kind of a buzzword, but be a business enabler, which is really our key. We don't want to be a cost reducer. We want to enable the business, and that's really important to what we do.
I really like that. That's a very good way to look at it, is to be a business enabler and not just a cost center. When you kind of, when you look at just different industries in general, in some of them, security could be a critical business enabler and also a business revenue driver. And in some of the other ones, that's not really the case. Kind of being that you're in, I want to say, the kind of the health tech field per se. How do you see cyber defined in kind of your vertical?
Within the fintech or insurance space?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it means different things to different businesses, and it really depends on organizational priorities and strengths. And so I know that for Acrisure, it is a key strength of ours, and what's important about it too is that we can help the business take on certain risks and make certain changes because we have our strong security. So one of the things that this transformation to be the most tech-enabled broker in the world, that requires us, a strong team backing them. And so I love that I have that opportunity to help be a part of that, because without it, how do you make that digital transformation? How do you make that transformation to really move the industry forward in terms of, you can buy all the AI and ML in the world and you can do all the research and it's awesome, but you have to have strong cyber behind it.
Yeah, and sorry for saying health tech. I don't know what I was thinking there for a moment. I'm like, fintech. That's right, fintech. I don't know why I was thinking health tech. That is my brain wandering off sometimes. You got to bring it back to earth.
Props to those people though, right?
You know what that's like, Jorel, right? Like, your brain just wanders off, and then, you've got to send Kal-El, away from your own planet to planet Earth, and he's got to be the superhuman on planet Earth. And
absolutely. I'll go with that analogy.
Let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity, right? And cyber has a lot of different disciplines within it. And as a new CISO, kind of being in your role for a year, where did you spend the most time over the last year? What aspect of cyber did you spend the most time on?
Yeah, without getting into too much detail, I think a lot of it has to do with governance, risk, and compliance. You have the ever-evolving landscape there. Cyber threats are evolving, but a lot of the TTPs at the end of the day are quite similar. But the GRC, especially with compliance And with Acrisure being the most acquisitive insurance broker in history, we're moving into new territories, and as part of that, we have to be able to understand where we're moving, and be flexible there. So I would say that would be one of the top ones for sure.
I love that. So when you talk about, let's talk a little bit about GRC, because GRC is kind of, for those who don't know what GRC is and they're listening, it's governance, risk, and compliance. It's what we like to call the Excel part of the business, right? I'm starting a movement and it's called Excel Anonymous. How can we get rid of Excels? And I'll be the first to admit, hi, my name is James Azar, and I'm addicted to Excels, and it's been 0 days since I've been Excel free.
Agreed. I don't think we'll ever get away from that. But I mean, isn't it so key to what GRC functions? But having a tool as well is really helpful for that. So.
Yeah, I'm going to issue a challenge on that real soon. Kind of like the idea of could we get rid of Excels in security? Maybe. I don't know. It's a school for thought, though.
But what advantages will it really get us? I mean, having everything in Excel is not always great, or not everything, but a lot of things. But what alternative? What are we really gaining versus what's the opportunity cost? Because this doesn't seem like what's worthwhile.
So I think that depends on the business, and I think that's why verticals vary when it comes to this stuff. And I don't know, and I don't want to turn this discussion into isn't Excel good or bad. I really want to talk about GRC.
Let's talk about GRC.
So let's talk a little bit about GRC. A lot of people find GRC to be very mundane, and in fact, it's kind of like the maybe the checklist of security, but not really actual security. How do you view GRC, and how is GRC really part of your security program?
Well, GRC, I mean, I understand why it gets that kind of rap, because compliance is not security and security is not compliance, right? But at the same time, it is a core of what we do. I mean, being compliant with the regulatory environment is completely essential to any business's operations, right? And it also enables us too, because it helps us get key resources to do the things we already knew we needed to do for security. So I don't really view it as a bad thing. I view it as an enabler for security. I will use that to my advantage every time.
That's very interesting, because you're right. Compliance is not security, but compliance is a business enabler, right? If you're not compliant, you probably can't be in business.
But you can be. I mean, you can be an Uber or whoever. I mean, they had to take those risks. That's part of what they were doing. But it's certainly a risk, and you have to understand whether you want to accept that risk or mitigate it or transfer it, et cetera. So, absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about governance, because I think governance is when people put GRC together, right? I get why risk and compliance could be in one category, right? To me, the G feels almost out of place, because governance is really strategy. It's really policy. Mm-hmm. And it's less about compliance, because your policies may be attributed a little bit to compliance, but it's really more about running your security program effectively. What are some of the key aspects of governance? Do you kind of agree with that statement, or do you think I'm off base there?
I don't know. I think I haven't really given a lot of thought to this, because I think you're right. We think about risk and compliance before we think, so it does feel a little bit off. But I'd say governance is really one of the things that kind of encapsulates a whole organization. Like, as CISOs, we're trying to defend against things like wire fraud, but governance is a really big part of that. So your email security tool is not ever going to be 100%, because none of them are. We know that BEC is a problem. We know that account takeovers are a problem. So how do we defend against that? So part of that is having really strong controls, financial controls, about how we conduct wire transfers or other financial transfers. I think that it is still a core component, and then policy and procedure does help feed into that. So, but it does feel like it's a little bit on the side of the risk and compliance piece, but it's super essential to what we do too.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's a really good point when you kind of look at governance in that perspective. But I live in a school of thought where I feel like GRC is not only a critical part of security. A lot of the compliance eventually rolls under security in one way or another, right?
Mhm.
And we're seeing more and more of that now, especially post some of the recent cyber incidents that we've seen that have really kind of are now transforming the way organizations look at GRC as a whole, because you're right about two things. Governance has its own little piece when it comes to risk and compliance and strategy, but it's also a critical driver of making security as a business enabler.
Right. Agreed.
So you talked about BECs, and a few weeks ago, the FBI released their 2021 IC3 report for 2020, and it was like almost $8 billion.
It jumped. I mean, then to no one's surprise, right? But it was a huge jump.
Well, it's made BECs much more easier to perform today because people are working from home. There's no office interaction. There's no one questioning something.
Yeah, potentially. I think it's also just it's that profitable. So why not?
But it's profitable for, if they're making 1.8 billion, that's reported, right? That's the numbers from the FBI are numbers that were reported to IC3. That's a small fraction of a really bigger problem.
Absolutely.
You can almost multiply that number by 10 or by 100, and I don't know that anyone would argue with you if you said it's not 4.3 billion, it's 430 billion. I don't know that anyone would argue against you on that claim either.
Right. Certainly tremendously high, right?
But BECs are easy to do. They're easy to do. They're not only profitable, but the cost of a BEC attack is really, you don't go outside the email aspect of a relationship.
I learned to hack when you can learn to send someone an email. You don't need 0 days.
No, you don't.
Right? Like Google, they invented essentially, the security keys and U2F FIDO2 about that. And they co-invented that with Yubico. And then they gave it to their 100,000 employees and contractors, which makes them virtually remote account takeover proof, right? And that they still suffered from a massive BEC attack, an extremely sophisticated one. So even when they made it impossible, effectively, virtually impossible, I'll say, because we don't say impossible in our field, to take over their accounts remotely, this was still the way to get in, even with a company with such tremendous cybersecurity strengths.
So you're talking about the theoretically impossible.
Well, I mean, so in 6 or 7 years or whatever it is that security keys have been around, no one has done, to anyone's knowledge, a account takeover, a remote account takeover, which is usually one of the things we're trying to guard against, on an account guarded just with the security key, like for instance with Google's Advanced Protection Program. So those keys, because they're use public key cryptography, they're the strongest form of MFA. So we say that the rest of forms are up to 99%. That one's so far 100%. I know there was a recent attack where someone figured out how to effectively clone a key, but you have to take the key apart. You have to spend hours on it, and you have to have extremely advanced skills, and then you just cloned it, which is great. But the main thing that most folks are trying to protect against is a remote account takeovers anyway, not physical threats. Because if you have a physical threat actor inside your building or with access to your stuff, you're already in a world of hurt, right?
Yeah.
But we're trying to prevent somebody far away from taking over our stuff, typically in an email environment, for instance.
So when we kind of that's a wonderful explanation, by the way, to kind of dealing with BECs, because for a lot of organization, it's a numbers game, right? How much is my email security solutions keeping out of people's inboxes, and how much is making it in, and then what's making it in, how dangerous is it, and are there other things I can do to stop it? On a BEC, what most people don't really know is, I think one of the things in the FBI report, one of the hidden nuggets I saw was that almost 87% of successful BECs were all plain text emails.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, those payloadless attacks, they're particularly difficult to detect for traditional stuff, especially I would argue FEG.
So you get a plain text email with, banking information. You don't think twice about it.
I'd say so there's BEC and there's ATO, right?
Right.
Not every BEC
Is
is
ATO.
or vice versa. But the ones where you combine them too, those are particularly difficult to detect, and then there's no attachment, there's no payload, because it's coming from who it's supposed to come from, because it's an ATO. It came from the same account you're expecting, the same IP addresses. So yeah, absolutely. That's always a challenge, and that's why I was kind of getting at on the governance side. We got to have a lot of multiple layers there.
I love how you typed that in. That's brilliant. Let's talk about a security project you enjoyed working on. Has there been one project that's really stood out for you? Maybe not in your current role, but maybe in something you've done in the past?
I don't know. I really love running with these kinds of programs. Be able to modernize things. I like improving existing controls and systems. So I think that it's really difficult to pick one, but email security, though, because it's something that everyone's concerned with, I'd say it's close to my heart. So that's without getting into those details, I think that's one of my favorite projects to work on.
I love it. So let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity in general, right? And so I'd say we've made some really positive steps towards really solving a lot of security challenges. In your opinion, what security challenge do you think we've done enough to address to a point where it's now, I don't want to say you don't think about it, but you go, we can do all we can do for that one specific threat?
Can you think of any like that? That's an interesting question.
I think there's a few challenges we've really done very well with. And you're reversing the question on the interviewer rather than answering it as the interviewee. I saw what you were doing, Superman's dad.
You're welcome.
So I will tell you what I think we're doing well. And you can kind of, we'll go down a list of a few things and you can say agree, disagree, and why.
I like that. Let's do that.
All right. Cyber awareness within the human workforce. I think we're doing that very, very well. We're at a point right now where I think cybersecurity awareness, beyond the stupid phishing tests, right? Just the idea of awareness and organizational culture, security culture is really improving leaps and bounds every hour of every day.
Yeah, I would say there's pretty vast acceptance of those programs too. They're not particularly controversial, but the effectiveness is certainly something that needs to be continuously tweaked, and the targetedness, like when you sweep the whole company with the same training video, like how effective is that sort of thing? How do you get more granular so you can really communicate what needs to be communicated to those particular stakeholders and groups?
Yeah, I mean, I customize it personally. I customize the stuff that I do from an awareness perspective. I also look at awareness a little different. And so when I do phishing tests, I don't care who clicks. I care who reports.
Yeah, absolutely. Same.
Right.
Reporting. I mean, I think that if you have some repeat offenders, potentially need to have some conversations there. But yeah, absolutely. The biggest statistic is who's reporting, because otherwise you can ramp the difficulty up and down. And it's kind of weird because you can play both ways at it if you want. Like, oh, no one clicked, therefore I'm awesome at training, or lots of people clicked, I'm awesome at training, or I'm bad at making, or I'm really good at making bad phishing emails. Like, it's all over the place. I think too, some of us suffer from a situation, especially with some of the larger players. If you don't customize their user awareness training and phishing simulations, users get just used to the simulations. They don't get used to phishing. And I think we've got to be cautious of that.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you just said. So here's another one for you. EDR and antiviruses. I think we've reached a point where there's nothing that anyone can bring to me now that would be different than what's already in the marketplace. Maybe a thing here or there. But I think, most EDR, and then some EDR people are going to hate me hate mail now. But maybe that's their problem and not mine.
Sure. I mean, I would say there's different tiers, right? You still have legacy antivirus,
Right.
you got some EDR, and then you have some real EDR, right? So for those of us with real EDR, I'd say, yeah, that's kind of we're like, yeah, we got that. But I would also say that we have to continuously be tuning it too, and giving a feedback loop. And I believe in feedback loops for basically everything. So if a single email, a phishing email or malicious email gets missed, it needs to be submitted to the email security company. So that way they can figure out why they missed it. If a piece of malware or a particular technique was missed or a vulnerability was exploited, any of that needs to be sent to the EDR vendor. So like you have to continuously have those feedback loops, or they're not going to improve, and you're not going to know why there was those misses. And that's how you're going to strengthen those particular programs. And if you have a real vendor that's also a true partner, they're really going to listen when you're going to go about these things, and they're going to make those improvements that you asked for.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I've got nothing to add. You said that perfectly. Well done. So we've talked EDR, we've talked awareness. Let me give you another one that I think we're doing fairly well. And this one's going to be a little bit controversial. Okay. Cloud security. I think cloud security tools are, all the tools are available on all aspects. And it's about the expertise of implementation. I don't think we have the workforce to really, apply all the existing cloud security tools that are out there today that I think do a pretty decent job of securing your cloud environment.
Yeah, cloud security, that is a fun one, a controversial one. And I like it, though. I really like it because there's some ways that some people, they can't stop talking about how bad cloud security is. But like, it's given us so many enhancements at the same time. Open buckets are, and unfortunately continue to be, a big problem. And I think that's ridiculous. Not even necessarily from the practitioner's perspective, but from the cloud providers that have allowed those to happen. I know that by now, most of the defaults are now like secure, right? But that went on for years, and they're just like, well, the customer didn't do it. And we're like, yeah, I know, but like, have you seen this stuff? So, but I think that we finally moved past that, and most of those buckets are from way back when, right? But I think that other ways too, like, who wants to maintain your own key infrastructure? Like that's a whole thing, and you have to be extremely good at it. Do you want to develop that competency, or do you want to put it in one of the big, the big three cloud compute providers and call it a day? I think that's one of the real strengths that we get. Another thing is, with some of these technologies, like we have continuous access evaluation, you just click a button, and now your whole organization's a little bit safer. Like, that's pretty cool, and that's kind of enhancement that the cloud's really getting us that we didn't have before. So I would argue that I don't like the naysayers in that space. So I would agree with your controversy there.
It also has to do, I think, a little bit with the fact that security by design in the cloud is much easier to implement than anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you don't have to patch depending on what we're talking about. But for some things, that does certainly the case. Absolutely. And when it's just there, and that also helps. And when the defaults are strong.
Yeah. So where do you still see a challenge? I've kind of talked about some stuff where I think we're doing well. What's one area that you still see a challenge in?
I mean, if we want to go back to the FBI report, I mean, that will just show you. But I would say that also just some folks just need the resources that they need to dedicated security staff. I think that really makes a big difference for any organization. You have to hire them, and then you have to enable them. And that'll be a game changer for some of the small organizations or medium-sized organizations out there. But I mean, because look, BC, obviously, ransomware, all these things, they're increasingly profitable and they work. So it's I can't sit here and say that that's not a problem. Definitely is.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the FBI report would have been like, yeah, no, BC's going down. Is it going down next year, James? The year after that? I don't think so. When is it finally? When do you think that trend's finally going to reverse for ransomware in BC? It's going to be a little bit. But
I think it'll only reverse when we have deterrence. And right now, the reason we have so much cybercrime is because we have very little deterrence. We have very, very little deterrence. We have maybe 10 or 15% of the victims actually reporting it. And I think that's where the challenge lies. I think if we create deterrence, meaning
from a legislative perspective,
to the criminals. Mm-hmm. So, in 1994, they passed a crime bill. So I proposed in 2021 that we pass a cyber crime bill. And it says that if you perform any level of cybercrime over $1,000, that's a felony with a 20-year jail sentence. And people are going to be like, James, you're crazy. But guess what? Only then will it not be worth it for someone to do it. Because the people who are sitting in Romania, Bulgaria, who do this, Ukraine, Russia, China, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, in Iran, in North Korea, if they know that if the US catches on to them and now they can't leave the country they're in, because if they do, they're probably going to get arrested and extradited and face 20 years in an American prison, they're probably going to think twice or three times before being part of a cybercrime organization. And I'm talking about cybercrime, not nation states.
Yeah, nation states are a whole other situation, aren't they?
Yeah, I think nation state deterrence is a little different, but I'm talking about the cybercrime bill of 2021.
I feel like that international collaboration aspect is going to be one of the trickiest things. I've heard from the FBI that even in some countries, DDoSes aren't illegal. They're effectively completely fine. You're just throwing resources. It's just more than they wanted. That seems like a real problem. Whether we pass something or not, it's not illegal there to cause that crime to go down. And then the nation state problem is, as you touched on, is the big one. And then I was reading recently too about some nation state threat actors would actually moonlight and do their own like ransomware on the side using code that they did during their day job for the nation state. So it looked like it was like the same nation state or something like that, but it wasn't. It was actually a separate threat actor who happened to share some code.
Well,
I think that's fascinating.
But I think that's why you need to do two aspects of deterrence, right? You got to have a nation state deterrence. And I've spoken about this extensively on our CISO Talk podcast clubhouse room. And so we talk a lot about it there. And I don't want to go into too much detail on it on the show because, well, we don't have enough time, number one, to talk about nation state deterrence, because that does require finesse, legislation, diplomacy, and a lot of those different things. It also requires kind of a buy-in from the private sector, because the only way a legislative body can create deterrence is by getting the private sector to sign on to the legislation and sign on to the economic consequences of something that happens from a nation state, right?
Yeah, NATO involved, you got to get Congress involved.
Don't say the word NATO or UN to me. I think those are the two most worthless. I think NATO has lost. The NATO and the UN were, what I like to say, how you said it earlier, virtual protection, kind of like virtually impossible. In concept, they were virtually good. In reality, they're about as worthless as it comes. Because I feel like, we've seen the tyranny over the last decade globally, and we've seen exactly what they've done. And that's been pretty much nothing. So, and I'm not saying they should go to war, but I'm saying that NATO should, if the NATO and the UN were to have some level of really effective deterrence, that have to have some teeth, which, as a global organization and for the sake of sovereignty, they don't, and they shouldn't have any teeth, because I don't want to be ruled by someone. I don't want someone determining what I, as an American in my own country, can or cannot do.
But you want to go to all the other countries and do that.
Well, I sometimes we're getting down the wrong rabbit hole here. That's a very interesting conversation, and I'm willing to have that debate because, I spent time in the military and in intel, and I do understand where what you're saying is coming from. But at the same time, international cooperation doesn't start with the UN. It starts with allies. So when the US passes a crime bill, that then let's say the UK and Australia and New Zealand and Ireland look at it and go, that's our crime bill too. Or Canada, sorry, not Ireland, Canada. The Five Eyes, our traditional five allies, right? And all five those allies go, you know what? That's a crime bill. We're all going to pass it. It's going to be extraditable in all of our nations. Well, very quickly on, the entire EU will sign on. And at that point, you've taken every place people want to go vacation off their list. So, and remember that there's a lot of threat actors that operate within the EU, that if the cybercrime bill is adopted within the EU, would be significant. It would really create a lot of deterrence. And I'm not saying it'll stop it.
Right.
But I'm saying that it would eliminate a good portion of it because it wouldn't be worth it. Very similar to why robbing a bank isn't worth it.
Right.
It's a deterrent. Right? If you get caught robbing a bank, you may make it off with some money, but if you get caught, you're going to 20 years.
As long as we're talking about the physical crime of robbing a bank, it's electronic. Right. It's a whole another situation, isn't it? But you're trying to say,
right.
Let's get that part too.
Yeah, but let's get that part too.
And I agree that the cooperation aspect's really important. And didn't we basically just see that, but just in a lot more piecemeal fashion with what was it, Emotet that got taken apart, or?
So Emotet got taken apart. You saw the Messenger get taken apart a few weeks ago as well in Europe, and that was a Dutch, Belgium, and German and French cooperation to take down an encrypted messenger that threat actors were using and go in and do arrests. But that shows you how these threat actors operate. I mean, that shows you that if you had a cybercrime bill, they don't have any deterrence right now. Zero. And when they go to court, right, they've made so much money, they can afford the best lawyers. They end up getting out on bail. They go through the judicial process, and at the end of it, they may get 5 years. I mean, I saw like this week, there were a bunch of stories of cyber criminals getting 12 months in jail, 10 months in jail. That's not a deterrence. Mm-hmm. If I went to you, Jorel, and put on your black hat for a moment, right? You're answering in hypothetical fashion, and I said, "Here's $10 million, and you'd have to be in jail for a year, and you get to keep your $10 million." Would you do it?
Right. Sure. I think most people would say yes to that, or a lot of people would. Certainly a lot. Yeah, and I can definitely see where you're coming from there. And I can see the advantages too of formalizing with legislation those connections between these groups of countries. So that way it doesn't have to be just a special task force or Emotet. It can be a continuous collaboration against all cyber criminals of these kinds of groups. Although I'd be careful too that, like, for instance, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, but the guy who effectively stopped WannaCry. I don't know if you saw that wire.
Yeah.
It's really long, expensive. That's the last guy though that I want to be like, let's put this guy in prison for the rest of his life, right? And that came kind of close to happening, because he's a really good guy, but based on everything he's done since that initial stuff, right? So he didn't even make that much money.
He started off as a bad guy.
Yeah.
Became a good guy.
Yep.
Right. Did really good things. Mm-hmm. But the criminal justice system doesn't ignore bad things because you're doing good things.
Yeah, but I feel like you have to have some sort of rehabilitation, right? It should be a thing, and that is weighed into most sentencing programs. So, like, how have they reformed since, or how did they reform while they were in jail? I mean, those are real things. I just wouldn't. While I would want to deter or discourage, young kids. I mean, he's like in his 20s, started out his teens, I think, from doing that kind of thing, and have them understand the gravity and the consequences of cybercrime. I still wouldn't want to be like, let's throw all these kids in jail for decades.
Yeah, I don't know that you.
They're not the nation state, and they're not the. But
today,
criminal group.
But I think you bring up a very interesting point here, which is no, I don't think any of us want to take an 18-year-old kid who did a cybercrime ring on his own, who's a genius, and send him to jail. And there's actual use case to that. Frank Abagnale Jr., the guy from Catch Me If You Can, he was an expert at check fraud. The guy did the best check fraud ever seen globally, right? And he ended up doing like 3 years in jail. And then he came out and he had a job at the FBI, and he works at the FBI until today.
Yep, exactly.
So I agree with the reform piece, but they also didn't have check fraud regulation. I think they didn't have any laws on the book for when he was doing check fraud, because checks were so new.
Sure.
Back then, right? They passed a law after he got caught, because he only got 3 years in jail because they couldn't get more than 10 for him. And that's the problem we have today with computer crime bills, is the sentencing is very lenient, so there's very little deterrence. And that's why I think we need more deterrence. But now we get to my favorite part of the show, Jorel. Right. We get to our CISO Insight round, our flash round of getting to know you on a more personal level. And I want to start off by inviting you to join me in my buzzword graveyard. It's full of buried buzzwords. Which buzzword would you like to bury in the buzzword graveyard?
I was supposed to remember this because it's so hard to pick, but at the same time, like, do we really commit something like zero trust to the graveyard when it is still, it just shouldn't be, vendors need to put it in their own respective graveyard. It's still an idea, it's still a goal, it's still a journey more than anything, but it's not a product. I think that we can put that as a concept, as a product there. I know someone on my team is very vocal about saying XDR, because it's like, is this just your souped up EDR? But like,
it's like a Mustang GT.
Yeah, like, okay, you put an X there. But I understand like where that's going, but I don't know if we all would agree that it's there at the vision of what it is. Is there also like, well, don't rip out your SIM though? I'm like, well, if you're not replacing my SIM, then is it like how many more complementary products do you want to offer? I would say it's more these particular phrases that vendors use that I want to commit to the graveyard more than anything. The things I see in every call, asking about the weather. Can we do that? Don't ask me about the weather. 10 minutes of introductions. Don't need that. I for my team and I do a now famous introduction where I spend 30 seconds introducing my team and I. So because that's the biggest time savings of my week. I now spend, it saves me a couple hours every week on introductions.
I like that. I also think that I tell vendors that if you're going to have more than 2 people on the call, I only give 15 minutes. But I think if you're going to have more than 2 people, then that's just not the right thing for me right now. 2 people, let's get it done. And be
well, what if they don't have the right people? You're like, where's your technical person? I don't want the introduction call to get to the people who know the actual product.
So I don't do intro goals. If it's not a solutions engineer on the call, I don't get on the call to begin with. And I think that's a standard. That's an expectation. So when a vendor books on my Calendly link, they typically get an email. Especially if it's for a pitch that says, if you don't have your technical guy on the call, and we don't see his invite and his info, then we're not going to show up.
Right.
We're just not going to show up.
Agreed.
Your website and videos tell me everything I need to know. I don't need you to explain to me what I saw on your website. I have specific questions of why I want to speak to you.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I saw. And then you had, I think it was you that had that question too about, how do you, if it's a new startup, how do you evaluate them? How do you say yes to those calls in the first place?
Yeah.
And that's why I think that the peer aspect is really important, because individually, you and I, we can't evaluate the hundreds of thousands of startups that call us and email us every day. But if we find something good, we can tell each other about it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges that exists for us CISOs today is our ability to gain information. If you're not on this Slack channel or if you're not in this Discord room, you're probably not in the loop as much. And I think that's that's a real challenge. Let's talk about one technology that'll change the way we do cyber.
I would still say the cloud, just because it evolves and sometimes allows us those one-click transformations. So again, the haters, the naysayers, I get it, the buckets, blah, blah, blah. But when it comes down to it, it still enables us to do tremendous things right out of the box and not have to maintain all the infrastructure. I had a SIM in a previous life. I spent more time maintaining the SIM than actually using it. I don't do on-prem SIMs for that reason, because they're maintaining the infrastructure is a pain. So I'd say the cloud is the game changer there. So yeah, controversial, I guess. So, not really though. Shouldn't be.
I love that. Yeah, I like that you said cloud. A lot of people typically say like quantum and AI, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think the natural evolution of the cloud is going to be to the fact where you're not going to need a SIM anymore. I think if you're a SIM provider right now, you better bet on the legacy businesses who are always going to need you and understand your. I was speaking to a VC about this yesterday. Because I kind of do a little side gig of working with VCs, and one of the VCs said, "Hey James, evaluate the SIM technology for me. We're thinking of investing in it." And I was like, don't just walk away, man. Yeah. He goes, "Why?" And I was like, "Because in 5 years, SIM isn't going to be a reality." And he goes,
I would also argue, we see SIM move to cloud, but then you have at least two of the three big cloud providers sell their own SIMs. And now you always have to pay AWS. Like, you're always paying them. They're cutting into your margins all day long. So like, where the model there is problematic. The big three can gobble you up or eat your lunch.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the quantum thing for a second?
Yeah.
Because for quantum, I think, and obviously I'm no expert on this, and I don't know too many experts on this, but like, the thing is, it's going to be a lot like TLS 1.0 to 1.1 to 1.2 to 1.3, because it's just another, we see weaknesses in the algorithm. There's all these things that are being predicted. So we move to post-quantum or quantum-resistant encryption, right? It's just an algo like any other before. So instead of doing AES 250 or AES 256, or we got rid of RC4, all these things, we retired old cipher suites. So we're going to eventually, we'll start to retire the existing cipher suites and do ones that are resistant to both quantum and conventional.
So people, whenever they hear about quantum, I could give you a few names of people who are unbelievable when it comes to quantum. One of them is Chris Lindberg. He's over at the CDC. He's their technology and innovation officer. I've had him on the show. You can go back, and we did an hour and 45-minute discussion on quantum. And I've read now, I think, over 15 or 16 books on quantum. I've done my own research on quantum. And I feel like when security people talk about quantum encryption, I think that's one aspect of quantum in general. And yeah, there's already post-quantum algorithms like that are resistant to that kind of stuff. That's already deployed. DoD's had it for years, so that just tells you how they're doing with quantum.
Cloudflare's had it for years. Yeah. You just use super isogeny elliptical curves or lessons. Yeah.
There's a bunch of different things that can be used. I see quantum as changing because I think quantum's going to change the way we receive, get data, and interpret data. So what you think today would take us maybe 3 or 4 days to pull together all the different data points and report them, that would not be the case anymore in quantum, because we'd get those results in a matter of seconds, if not a minute.
Depending on if it's like the traveling salesman problem or what problem we're trying to solve.
I think even beyond that, I think even from a cyber perspective, one of the use cases I'm working on with the university for, as we kind of look at quantum from a security perspective, is could I have an engine that's powerful enough to process millions of data points per second and show me the trends right there so that I can solve them and know the threat that's coming my way. And I think that's going to be very interesting. But yeah, quantum's fascinating, man. I geek out on quantum. The nerd in me comes out when we talk about quantum. I looked at quantum.
I just don't think of it as a sky is falling, like Shor's algorithm, everything breaks. And I'm just like this, although it is a game changer, we're just upgrading like we always have. We know this notice way ahead of time. We're going to switch to those algos. It's going to be important, but we're going to get there.
Yeah, I don't see quantum as being something where it's not a chicken little skies falling scenario. Quantum is Tesla doing 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds.
Agreed. Yeah, I like that.
Okay. It's an electric car doing 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds is unheard of. But a Tesla on ludicrous mode does that. So yeah. Did that eliminate all other cars? Is every car you see on the road a Tesla? No. And quantum's going to be the same thing. Some businesses will adopt quantum computing and use it. I don't think quantum in the first 2 or 3 decades of use will be widely used like people think. Like you and I won't have a quantum computer at home. Quantum will be in large data centers. It'll be in
the cloud. It'll be API based.
Yeah, it'll be API based and you'll get access to it. And it'll kind of be the engine. So you'll be plugging into it. Kind of like a charging port almost. like that's, everything I've seen tells me the sky's not falling. And it also tells me that it's the only thing it's really going to do is, if you're thinking of a career in cyber and something else, do a career in cyber and be a data scientist. Because as quantum comes along, we're going to need a lot more data scientists because we're going to be able to analyze these data points much quicker. And if you're an AI person, then you want to understand quantum, because quantum is going to give us real, true AI, real, true human-like AI, not the AI we see today. The AI we see today is naturally flawed and it's slow. Like ride in a Tesla in ludicrous mode, then get into like a Camaro.
Yeah, because it's still bound by conventional computing, but
correct.
It certainly is useful in a lot of things. It's and that's why I'm not committed. I'm sure someone's coming on your show and committed AI ML to your graveyard.
Yes, they've done that.
I'm going to be the last person to do that.
No, but that's why I think that's where I think quantum is really special. By the way, I think quantum is very special in the fact that it would enable true AI, and I mean true AI, not the restricted AI we have today. Not to say that we don't have it, but AI is much slower than it should be.
So quantum leap, right?
It'll be I love that. That's so good. You're such a geek. Yay. All right. What's the what book are you reading right now?
You know what? I'm not reading a lot of books right now. I'm just consuming like articles all over the place. And that's disappointing because I used to read like continuously. Like when my wife was pregnant, I read the entire Dune series, like all of them, except for the ones by the son. He's not as good. But all the Frank Herbert stuff, I read all of them. But I would also say like the 3-body trilogy by Six and Liu is really awesome, and depressing by the 3rd book. If you don't know anything about it, I'll give a huge spoiler. It is that it starts with the Chinese Cultural Revolution and it ends with the death of the universe. So it's a pretty big story in terms of timelines.
Wow. You just gave me a spoiler alert.
Yeah, sorry. And everything ends with the heat death of the universe, though. So
yeah, almost. Even the Bible ends with the end of the world, right?
Sure.
What's the last movie you saw?
I think it's called I Really Care a Lot, or I Care a Lot.
Or I Care a Lot, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another one of those Netflix movies where you're like, they got in the algorithm into your brain and it just tells you this will be an okay movie. And then they created that movie and then they put it in front of you and you consume it. It's very interesting how those platforms are now so good at creating the content just based on this will be all right and getting you to watch it.
Yeah, I like confusing the living hell out of my Netflix algorithm. At this point, its recommendations to me make no sense. It's got Adam Sandler, Bill Burr, Samuel L. Jackson, a bunch of Jason Statham, and then a bunch of documentaries about Hitler and World War II.
All right.
Like the algorithm just looks at me and goes, "Who the hell are you?" And like every time I do something, like I mess with the algorithm all day long. All day long. All right. 2 final questions here. Your favorite music?
Indie and hardcore metal.
Love it. And what's one thing you took away from SolarWinds?
SolarWinds 1, 2, 3. No, I mean, we just see the intern blame thing's fun, but just overall, just it's interesting to see a supply chain hack. But then also, how many organizations were affected. But then that FireEye found it. I think that it shows that our government should be concerned more about defending themselves as well as defending us, rather than some of the we don't conduct offensive operations stuff. I think that would be really helpful if I felt like the NSA was more on my side. Certainly we have some good collaborations with the FBI and everything like that, but I think they could step it up. And it is kind of weird that it had to be FireEye that found it. And that when our government organizations do find things, it'd be really nice if they could tell us instead of.
Yeah, I agree. That's something that I know former CISO director who ran the NKIC, John Felker, was very big on. He goes, we want to share information, but please, for the sake of God, when you share information with us, don't make it top secret.
Mm-hmm.
Not everything you share with us is top secret. When you make things top secret every time you share it with them, you're slowing down the entire process of information sharing. So awesome. Jorel, thank you for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, James. It's been fun.
This has been an awesome episode, folks. Jorel Van Os from Acrisure. So make sure to check him out, connect, and let us know what you think. Comment and subscribe below. Another awesome CISO Talk episode next week. Joining me will be the magnificent Monica Verma. We're going to be having an awesome conversation across the Atlantic, so you don't want to miss that episode. Until then, folks, thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for tuning in. Stay healthy and stay cyber safe.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.